relevant, reliable, and researched. This is Experts on Call, the show focused on delivering leading-edge news and information on today's most beneficial products and services. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
There's one for you, 19 for me. 'Cause I'm the tax man. Yeah.
Welcome back to Experts on Call. Key Pacific's Talk About Strata. Tony Gioventu, our musical director, as well as being the executive director of the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia, and lawyer Veronica Franco from the law firm Clark Wilson in Vancouver, in the studio with me, Sterling Fox. Tony, you selected the Beatles' Taxman by way of a little tune to include. Appropriate, I suppose, because we're looking at the negative side, if you will, of delinquent behavior for strata owners, as all of these 2012 numbers are starting to be churned out en masse as we experience every January. And one of the trends that we've noticed already across British Columbia is an increase in court order for sale proceedings due to non-payment of strata fees and special levies. Veronica and Tony have identified what strata fees and special levies are and how they're collected and what happens if you don't pay yours. Now, there's also a matter, Veronica, of fines. When you are delinquent or in arrears on your payments, do you get fined for that in addition to now owing the Strata Council X number of months of condo fees? Do they have a fine, a penalty they impose on top of that?
Potentially, it depends on their bylaws. So if their bylaws set out that the strata fees are due by a particular due date and that they're not paid, the bylaws may provide a specific fine for late payment of strata fees, or they might have a general fine bylaw that allows a strata corporation to fine in relation to any bylaw that an owner is in contravention. So the starting point is you have to have a bylaw that allows you to fine for not paying your strata fees.
And without that, there are no fines?
There are no fines.
Okay.
Then the next step is that the council has to make a decision to go down the road of trying to fine an owner for the late payment of a strata fee. Now, what I typically see happen is that strata corporations automatically levy a late fine. And I think the thinking or the rationale is that, well, they didn't pay their strata fees. It's pretty obvious they're in breach of the bylaw, so we're going to levy a late fine. No need to go through any procedure. Except the Strata Property Act makes it clear that whenever you levy any kind of fine, you have to follow a specific procedure that gives the owner that's being fined due process.
Okay. And
that step is often skipped when you're dealing with late fines.
And courts really tend not to be impressed with a lack of due process.
No, and generally speaking, if you haven't followed due process, your fines are going to be thrown out. So if you want to actually collect on your fines, you have to follow the process. And simply, the process requires the Strata Council to make a decision to, like I said, to go down the road of trying to levy a fine against the owner. They have to send a letter to the owner advising them, this is what you've done. For example, you haven't paid your strata fees. This non-payment of strata fees is a contravention of this particular bylaw, and the consequences for not paying your strata fees and contravening this bylaw is a fine or of whatever it is in the Strata Corporation. Right. And it can only be a maximum of $200.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, and then you have to give the owner an opportunity to respond. So you say in your letter, you have X number, 14 days, for example, to respond, to essentially give them an opportunity to say, oh, wait a second, it was a mistake. Right. Or whatever reason that they have for not having paid their strata fees, or that in fact they did pay them and that this is all a big misunderstanding. Sure. And if the owner wants a hearing before council to explain their side of the story, the Strata Council must give them that hearing before they actually levy the fine. So this letter is kind of like informing them that this process is going to take place with respect to levying a fine. So let's say the owner doesn't respond, or they do respond and they send a letter back, or they've requested a hearing. Only after those processes take place, does the council meet and decide, did this owner contravene the bylaws? And if they did, should we be levying a fine in this particular circumstance?
Okay.
And if they do decide that a fine is appropriate and that there has been a contravention of the bylaws, then that fine is levied. The owner is informed by the Strata Council via letter of their decision to fine them. And
with a specific, here, we're fining you this amount,
yes,
and you've got 30 days to pay up. Would there be a specific term attached to the amount, and we'd like to see that paid by such and such a date?
Yeah, yes, you can do that. Sometimes the bylaw specifically might have might actually say that the fines are added to the account of the owner, and they're payable as part of the monthly assessment. So you have to look at the bylaws to see if there's any specific due dates as well.
Tony, now Veronica's been talking about fines as they might apply to unpaid either special levies or strata fees. What other types of fines are strata or condo owners liable for, might be liable for, in their day-to-day comings and goings around their homes?
Anything that deals with the bylaws. So pets, age, rentals. Rentals is one of the exceptions that if you have amended your bylaws and someone is renting in violation of the bylaws, you can actually charge $500 for a penalty.
Oh, somebody subletting a condo, for example, in a building that doesn't allow that.
It could be, exactly.
Oh, that's
right?
finable. Okay.
And that is $500 that can be reoccurring every 7 days. So you could be facing a fine of $2,000 a month for renting, which is a reasonable penalty to deter you from renting your unit. Mm-hmm. So fines can apply to almost any activity with respect to a breach of the bylaws. The difficulty with strata fees and special levies is, for some reason, strata corporations think that they're going to charge both interest and fines, and they start compounding all of these things on the accounts. And what ends up happening is they start dual penalizing the clients, for starters. But the more dangerous problem is that they stop efficient record keeping and separating and segregating things that are not lienable, such as fines, away from the special levies and from the strata fees. And it really creates a lot of problems for the Strata Corporation when you're filing leads or making court applications with respects to poor accounting records, because those items will not be granted. That's what's going to end up happening. And if they're there and they shouldn't be there, you're going to have the likelihood of having your application dismissed.
And Veronica, you're nodding all the way through Tony's explanation of this last little bit quite comfortably. Clearly, this is a situation you see in your law practice all the time.
Absolutely. What ends up happening, as Tony says, is that I end up receiving an account ledger that's got fines, it's got unpaid strata fees, interest that's been charged, and I'm given a copy of the certificate of lien that was filed on that with respect to that particular strata lot, and it's the total amount on that ledger for a specific date, and which means that it's included the fines, it's included interest on items that are not lienable, and NSF charges, all sorts of things that should not be included in the lien. And if you go to court with that lien, the court has said in the past that it's an invalid lien and you lose your priority. So you still may get judgment for the amount that's owing, but you don't have priority. So you have to then still go back and go through the process of imposing a lien and having to go back to court to get an order for sale.
Because you messed up the paperwork on the first round.
That's right.
I got it.
And not only that, you will have expended a whole bunch of money going to court, and the court may not give you your costs.
Right.
So all you end up with just a grand total of what the court says this is how much is owing, without any compensation for your efforts to get there.
Again, something Tony's been saying since we started doing this show over a year ago. A little homework, friends, goes an awfully long way. I don't know which one of you two wants to take this question, but can the Strata Corporation apply strata fee money to fines and then force the strata lot into lienable collection procedures?
I'll start. How's that?
Okay.
It's a complicated problem. The legislation has granted a privilege to strata corporations for those fees and costs that the strata corporation must collect.
Okay.
And that is special levies and strata fees. Those are things the strata corporation must collect. They have a duty to collect them. Strata owners must pay them. So the legislation granted this priority over all other things necessary to protect the interests of the strata corporation. So you look at those things, you see these things are essentially legislated statutory obligations. I must pay my strata fees, I must pay my special levies. Fines, damages to strata lots, an insurance deductible because I might have flooded out my unit, all of those things are allegations. So what we've done now is we've transitioned from those things I must pay to those things that now we have as Veronica said, a due process to dispute here.
Okay.
I have the rights under natural justice to challenge the evidence, the information, the procedures that were conducted. Is this fair? What was the application of it? Was it even valid? As an owner, I have a right to challenge all of those issues. Those items with respects to fines, damages, an insurance deductible associated with just one strata lot are not lienable. So even if we went to court, and made in provincial court over $5,000 worth of fines because someone has been renting their unit.
Okay.
We may be successful and get a judgment for the $5,000 worth of fines. We will not get priority that we can lien for those fines. It is still secondary to what is we owe the strata corporation for strata fees and for levies, and bank mortgages and those types of issues come ahead of the judgment over the fines and the penalties. The strata corporation may have a difficult time collecting them. There's another issue that's a bigger issue that's being overlooked, though.
Okay.
Strata corporations, for most people now, they pay their their strata fees with direct bank deposit.
Yeah,
right?
authorized debits.
Authorized debits.
Sure.
The authorized debit says it's for the purpose of strata fees.
Right.
Right? It's not for any other purpose. The strata corporation, if they're using the strata fees money for any other purpose, may be committing a fraud. They may be doing something that is not lawful, and they are certainly not complying with the bank contract that authorized them to issue this money.
Veronica, sorry, Tony,
yeah.
is this just a poorly advised strata council that's trying to pull this stunt that Tony's describing? Do they just not know better, usually?
Part of it is they don't know better. Part of it is they think that this is just a clever way of collecting those fines that are sitting on the books.
Okay.
And what they do is what they do to make it legitimate is they pass bylaws that say
after the fact.
No, before the fact. They'll
Okay.
say they'll pass a bylaw that says all the money that we receive from the homeowner first will be applied to fines, then to administrative charges, then to NSF charges, then to insurance deductibles, and so they have this really long list, laundry list, and at the bottom is strata fees and special levies. So the idea is they collect as much money and apply it to the things that they know they have a lot harder time to prove in court that they are entitled to.
Right.
And as a result, they find themselves thinking, well, I have a bylaw. This supports, the owners have voted for it, 3/4 vote in support of this, so we should be fine. But what they haven't really thought about, and I don't think a lot, like everything from property managers right down to strata councils, is that when an owner signs their pre-authorized debit form, there are some very specific rules that govern that form, and there's a lot of fine print. And quite frankly, if a strata corporation were to take out fines and that kind of a payment is not covered in their pre-authorized debit,
then they stepped over the line, haven't
they have, and the bank can reverse that, refund the money back to the owner, and you're out of pocket for that money anyways.
You know, when we buy homes, regardless of what type of home we end up buying, inevitably we find ourselves complaining a little bit about these bloody conveyancing fees. There's some lawyer's going to get way too much money for rubber stamping this thing. This is driving me crazy. Well, guess what? I have a lawyer sitting in the studio who does this for a living. And by the sounds of things, this service that is provided by lawyers to their clients as a matter of law and course, perhaps a lot of the conversations that should accompany the check and the providing of the service don't take place. Veronica, it sounds like a lot of people never ask their lawyers, why am I giving you X number of $100 to essentially rubber stamp my paperwork?
Yes, I don't know where the communication breakdown comes in, who's not informing who, why they're not informing themselves. But I think a lot of homeowners end up going naively into the idea of condo living, carefree,
well, yes,
and I just have to write this check and not even thinking about what the bylaws look like, how it's going to impact the homeowner in the event of contraventions of bylaws, taking a look at the whole situation to see whether this is a good strata corporation that fits with me as a person.
Interesting stuff. We need to take a quick break. Lots still left on the table. We'll come right back. Tony Gioventu from the BC Condominium Homeowners Association and Veronica Franco from the law firm Clark Wilson in studio with Stirling Fox. It's Experts on Call on AM 650.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call. And there's more still ahead on AM 650.